The Zephyrian Confederation had spent the better part of 3 millennia perfecting the art of looking important while accomplishing absolutely nothing. It was, by all accounts, a masterclass in bureaucratic evolution, natural selection favoring those who could drone on about trade regulations for 17 consecutive hours without once addressing the actual problem at hand. Their latest masterpiece was Neutral Station Omega-7, a gleaming testament to diplomatic inefficiency orbiting the dead system of Kepler 4.422. The station boasted 47 different conference rooms, each designed to accommodate the specific atmospheric, gravitational, and psychological needs of the galaxy's various species. There were rooms filled with methane for the crystalline collective, underwater chambers for the depth dwellers of Aquatica Prime, and one particularly awkward space that was just a massive sandbox for the silicon-based Granular Republic. What the station notably lacked was results. In its brief 200-year history, Omega-7 had successfully mediated exactly 0 conflicts, resolved -3 trade disputes, and had somehow made the ongoing war between the hegemony of scattered stars and the coalition of free worlds considerably worse through what historians would later describe as aggressive neutrality. Today's proceedings promised to continue this proud tradition of diplomatic failure. Ambassador Kelvic Thornweave of the coalition adjusted his ceremonial robes, 17 layers of bureaucratic significance that made him look like a very disappointed Christmas tree. The Altarian had spent the last 4 decades perfecting the art of diplomatic disappointment, an expression that suggested the universe had personally insulted his mother and then asked to borrow money. "Remind me again," he said to his aide, a nervous Centaurian whose name roughly translated to "anxious about everything including this conversation," why the hegemony requested this meeting. "They claim to have developed new negotiating tactics, Your Excellence. Something about demonstrating the futility of resistance through overwhelming displays of military superiority." Ah! Thornweave's 4 eyes performed a perfectly synchronized role. So they're going to bring their biggest ships, loudest weapons, and most intimidating warriors to a peace negotiation. How delightfully counterproductive. Should we match their displacer? The military advisors have suggested. No. Thornweave waved a dismissive appendage. Let them play their little intimidation games. I have something far more effective. Sir, I've brought a human. The aide's facial tentacles went through a series of expressions that would have impressed a professional mime. A human, sir. For what purpose? Bodyguard duty. But sir, humans are, well, they're humans. They haul cargo, they clean things, they occasionally fix broken atmospheric processes while complaining about working conditions. They're not exactly known for their combat prowess. Thornweave's smile was the diplomatic equivalent of a loaded weapon. My dear fellow, you clearly haven't been paying attention to the intelligence reports. The truth was, most of the galaxy hadn't been paying attention to the intelligence reports about humans. This was partly because human intelligence reports made for spectacularly boring reading, mostly consisting of shipping manifests, maintenance schedules, and lengthy complaints about cafeteria food quality. But buried in those mundane documents were some rather interesting footnotes that most species had dismissed as clerical errors. Footnotes like the time a human cargo handler had single-handedly prevented a pirate boarding by using nothing but a maintenance wrench, and what the report described as creative applications of basic physics, or the incident where a human janitor had somehow talked a hegemony death squad into surrendering by offering them coffee and explaining, in excruciating detail, the proper way to file a workplace grievance. The galaxy's assessment of humanity could be summarized thusly: harmless, useful, and slightly strange. They were the species you called when you needed something heavy moved or a complex system repaired by someone who would work for reasonable wages and only complain moderately about safety protocols. What most species failed to appreciate was that any creature capable of surviving on a death world like Earth while simultaneously developing poetry, jazz music, and competitive eating contests was probably not as harmless as it appeared. Marcus Tank Rodriguez stood 6 feet of unimpressed humanity in the station's main corridor, watching various alien dignitaries scurry past like bureaucratic insects. He was what humans called built like a brick shithouse, though he preferred the more diplomatic description of structurally sound. Tank had the kind of face that suggested he had been personally insulted by the concept of fear and had decided to do something about it. His expression suggested that he had seen everything the universe had to offer and found most of it lacking in both imagination and proper execution. So, he said to Ambassador Thornweave as they approached the main conference chamber. "Let me get this straight. These hegemony guys want to intimidate you into surrendering by bringing their biggest, scariest warriors to what's supposed to be a peace talk. That is the general idea, yes. And your plan is to sit there and let them posture until they get bored, more or less." Tank nodded thoughtfully. "Cool. Should I look intimidating, or just stand there looking like I'd rather be somewhere else?" "The latter will be fine. Trust me. Looking bored is far more unsettling to most species than looking dangerous." "Got it." One professionally bored human coming right up. The conference chamber was a marvel of diplomatic engineering, designed to make everyone equally uncomfortable in the name of fairness. The gravity was slightly off for everyone, the temperature was wrong for all species involved, and the chairs had been designed by a committee that had clearly never encountered the concept of proper lumbar support. Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul of the Hegemony of Scattered Stars entered the chamber like a natural disaster with delusions of grandeur. He stood 8 feet of crystalline fury, his carapace gleaming with what could charitably be called aggressive mineral deposits, and less charitably described as geological anger issues. Behind him marched his personal guard, 6 of the most intimidating warriors the hegemony could muster. There was Commander Zixtal, whose species had evolved from apex predators and had never quite gotten over it. His forearms ended in claws that could slice through hull plating, and his smile suggested he was considering whether Ambassador Thornweave would taste better grilled or raw. Next came Battle Mistress Quindar of the Void Stalkers, a species that had learned to survive in the vacuum of space by becoming essentially mobile nightmares. She moved with the fluid grace of something that had never met a problem it couldn't solve through creative violence. The third member of their party was Warmaster Gricknoff, representing a species whose homeworld had a surface gravity 12 times that of Earth. He was built like a living tank and had the personality of a weapons malfunction. Bringing up the rear were 3 members of the Scion Corps, beings who had developed telepathic abilities specifically for the purpose of making their enemies soil themselves in terror before the actual fighting began. They projected an aura of psychic menace that made most sentient beings question their life choices. It was, by any reasonable standard, an impressive display of intimidation. The collective presence of these warriors could have made a black hole reconsider its position on light absorption. They arranged themselves around the conference table with the kind of precision that suggested they had practiced this routine in front of mirrors. Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul settled into his chair with a sound like grinding consonants, and fixed Ambassador Thornweave with a stare that had reportedly made suns go supernova out of sheer nervousness. "So," he rumbled, his voice carrying the subtle menace of tectonic plates having a disagreement, "you have brought your bodyguard." All eyes turned to Tank, who was leaning against the wall with the relaxed posture of someone waiting for a particularly boring bus. He looked like he might check his watch if he had one, or possibly fall asleep if the proceedings continued at their current pace. "I have," Thornweave confirmed pleasantly. "I trust you have no objections to his presence?" Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul's laugh was the sound of asteroids having trust issues. "Objections? To a human? My dear Ambassador, humans are, well, humans. They are adequate for moving cargo and performing basic maintenance tasks, but hardly what one would consider a credible threat." Tank's expression didn't change, but something in his posture suggested he was filing this comment under things to remember later when everyone is having less fun. "Indeed," Commander Zixtal added, flexing his claws in what was probably meant to be a subtle threat, but came across more like a very expensive manicure advertisement. "We have studied human physiology. They are soft, slow, and lack any natural weapons. What exactly is one human supposed to accomplish against the elite warriors of the hegemony?" "An excellent question," Tank said mildly, speaking for the first time since entering the chamber. His voice carried the kind of calm that suggested he had given this matter considerable thought and had reached some interesting conclusions. The hegemony delegation turned to stare at him. Up close they could see that while Tank was undeniably human, soft skin, no natural armor, ridiculously fragile-looking joints, there was something in his eyes that didn't quite match the general galactic assessment of humanity. It was the look of someone who had been places and done things, and had come to terms with both. "You wish to know what one human can accomplish?" Tank asked conversationally. "Well, that depends on the human, doesn't it?" Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul's massive form shifted with a sound like a landslide with anger management issues. Are you suggesting that you, a single member of one of the galaxy's most unremarkable species, pose some kind of threat to us? Tank appeared to consider this question with the careful attention of someone choosing wine for a difficult dinner party. Threat is such an aggressive word. I prefer to think of it as probability assessment. Explain. Well, let's see. Tang straightened up from the wall, and somehow the casual movement made every warrior in the room tense slightly. You've got Commander Zixtal there, apex predator species, 4 arms, claws that can slice through hull plating. Impressive. But I notice he's favoring his left side. Old injury, maybe? And those claws are great for intimidation, but they're also great for getting stuck in things, like bulkheads, or body armor, or other claws. Zextal's expression shifted from confident menace to confused annoyance. How did you, Battle Mistress Quendar? Tank continued, as if he hadn't been interrupted. Void Stalker species, adapted for zero-G combat. But we're not in zero-G, are we? You're having to constantly adjust for gravity, micro-corrections in your balance. It's subtle, but it's there. And that fluid movement style works great in vacuum, but in atmosphere? With gravity pulling you down? It becomes predictable. Quendar's fluid grace became noticeably more rigid. War Master Gricknolt, 12G homeworld built like a tank. Except tanks are slow, and they're designed for specific types of combat. Put a tank in the wrong environment and it becomes a very expensive paperweight. You're strong, sure, but strength without speed is just delayed failure. Gricknoth's rumbling growl suggested that he had some thoughts about delayed failure and was considering demonstrating them immediately. And the Scion Core, Tank said, turning to the 3 telepathic intimidators. Telepathic fear projectors, handy trick, except here's the thing about fear. It only works if the target cares about the consequences. The psychic aura of menace suddenly felt less impressive, like background radiation from a particularly pessimistic star. Supreme War Marshal Vekthul rose from his chair with a sound like geological formations having a midlife crisis. Enough of this. You analyze our capabilities as if knowledge alone will save you, but analysis means nothing in the face of superior firepower. True, Tank agreed. But here's what your intelligence reports probably didn't mention about humans. And what is that? Tank's smile was the diplomatic equivalent of a nuclear weapon with a sense of humor. We're really good at making things worse. The first sign that the situation was about to become complicated was when the lights went out. The second sign was the sound of 6 different weapon systems powering up simultaneously, followed immediately by the sound of those same systems powering down in what could only be described as electronic confusion. The third sign was Tank's voice, still perfectly calm, coming from a completely different location in the now dark chamber. See, the thing about intimidation tactics is that they assume your opponent is playing by the same rules you are. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting dramatic shadows that somehow made the situation worse instead of better. The hegemony's elite warriors found themselves in what military tacticians would later describe as an unfortunate arrangement, which was a polite way of saying they had somehow managed to get in each other's way while trying to locate a single human in a room they had controlled just moments before. But humans, Tank's voice continued, now coming from yet another location, we don't really do rules, we do what works. Commander Zixtal spun toward the sound, claws extended, only to discover that his impressive natural weapons had somehow become entangled in Battle Mistress Quendar's equipment harness. Her attempt to free herself had resulted in both of them becoming attached to War Master Gricknoth's ceremonial armor, creating what looked like a very confused and increasingly angry sculpture titled Elite Warriors Having a Bad Day. The galaxy sees us as cargo haulers and janitors, Tank's voice explained helpfully, because that's what we let them see. It's convenient. People tend to ignore the help. The 3 members of the Scion Corps were attempting to project coordinated psychic intimidation, but their telepathic abilities seemed to be experiencing some kind of interference. Instead of projecting fear, they were projecting what could best be described as mild concern about cafeteria lunch options and uncertainty regarding proper filing procedures. But here's what we actually are, Tank said, and this time his voice came from directly behind Supreme War Marshal Vekthul. The 8-foot crystalline warrior spun around, only to find empty air. We're the species that looked at a death world full of things trying to kill us and decided to domesticate them. We're the species that invented warfare as recreation. We're the species that figured out how to make fire, then immediately used it to cook things that were still trying to run away. Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul was beginning to suspect that his intelligence reports had missed some crucial details about human psychology. Show yourself, coward. Coward? Tank's laughter echoed through the chamber from multiple directions simultaneously. That's rich, coming from someone who brought 6 bodyguards to intimidate 1 diplomat. The emergency lighting flickered again, and when it steadied, Tank was standing exactly where he had been at the beginning of the confrontation, leaning against the wall with the same relaxed posture. The only difference was that somehow, in the span of less than 3 minutes, the hegemony's elite warriors had managed to become thoroughly tangled in their own equipment, and were now sitting in a pile of expensive armor and wounded dignity. How? Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul demanded. Maintenance tunnels, Tank explained cheerfully. Turns out when you spend your career fixing things, you learn where all the access panels are. Also, your security protocols are based on the assumption that anyone trying to infiltrate will use the obvious routes. Humans don't really do obvious. Ambassador Thornweave, who had spent the entire 3 minutes calmly reviewing his notes, looked up with polite interest. I trust this demonstration has been educational for everyone involved. Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul stared at his elite warriors, who were attempting to untangle themselves with the kind of careful precision usually reserved for defusing explosive devices. His crystalline features cycled through several expressions, ranging from confusion to embarrassment, to the dawning realization that he had made some significant miscalculations. The human did nothing, he protested weakly. Exactly, Tank agreed. I didn't have to. You did it all yourselves. I just turned off the lights and let you be intimidating in the dark. Turns out elite warriors are a lot less elite when they can't see who they're supposed to be intimidating. But the weapons systems, oh, those. Yeah, I may have mentioned to your tech guys that there was a problem with the power coupling in conference room 7. Very safety conscious, your people. Shut everything down soon as they detected an anomaly. Vex Thul turned to his aide, a nervous-looking being whose species had evolved anxiety as a survival trait. Is this true? Well, sir, there was a very polite human who mentioned some concerns about electrical safety, and our protocols do require you shut down our weapons because a human asked nicely. Seemed very knowledgeable about power systems, sir, and he brought coffee. Tank nodded approvingly. Good coffee too. Your technical staff has excellent taste. The silence that followed was the kind of silence that suggested the universe was reconsidering some of its fundamental assumptions. Supreme War Marshal Vex Thul looked at his warriors, still untangling themselves. He looked at Tank, who was checking his fingernails with the air of someone who had better places to be. He looked at Ambassador Thornweave, whose expression suggested he was trying very hard not to laugh. This is not over, Vex Thul declared, though his heart clearly wasn't in it. Actually, Tank said mildly, I think it kind of is. See, here's the thing about intimidation. It only works once. After that, it's just theater. And honestly, your theater needs work. The Supreme War Marshal of the hegemony of scattered stars, terror of 17 systems, and the bane of 14 different species, slowly sat down in his chair. His crystalline features had settled into an expression that suggested he was having some serious thoughts about career changes. What do you want? He asked quietly. Ambassador Thornweave smiled, the kind of smile that suggested he had been waiting for exactly this question. World peace would be nice, also better trade agreements, mutual defense pacts, and maybe something could be done about those tariffs on agricultural products. And if we refuse? Tank stretched, a casual movement that somehow made every warrior in the room flinch slightly. Well, that's your choice, but I should probably mention that I've got about 200 colleagues working maintenance and cargo throughout hegemony space. Nice people, very helpful. Always willing to lend a hand with technical problems. Are you threatening us? Me? No, not at all. I'm just saying that humans are very service-oriented. We like to help. And we're everywhere, fixing things, maintaining things, keeping everything running smoothly. Tank's smile was perfectly innocent. Would hate for anything to stop running smoothly. The implications of this statement hit the hegemony delegation like a meteor strike to the conceptual cortex. Humans weren't just cargo haulers and janitors. They were cargo haulers and janitors with access to every critical system in the galaxy. They were the people who fixed the life support, maintained the gravity generators, and serviced the weapons systems. They were invisible, helpful, and absolutely everywhere. Supreme War Marshal Vex Thule was beginning to understand that he had made what military strategists called a significant tactical error, though he preferred to think of it as a learning experience that was going to require some serious medication. "The peace treaty," he said slowly. "Where do I sign?" 3 hours later, Ambassador Thornweave was reviewing the hastily drafted peace accords in his quarters while Tank worked on a crossword puzzle. The human had declined the diplomatic team's offer of a celebration dinner, explaining that he had a supply run to finish and deadlines to meet. 17 across, Tank muttered. 7 letters. Diplomatic solution to intergalactic conflict. Leverage, Thornweave suggested. Doesn't fit. Tank penciled in some letters. "Oh wait, janitor. That works," Thornweave laughed. A sound like crystalline wind chimes having a good time. "You know, most species would have used actual violence to achieve what you accomplished in 3 minutes. Violence is inefficient," Tank replied, not looking up from his puzzle. "Takes too much energy, causes property damage, and someone always ends up filing complaints. Much easier to just let people intimidate themselves. Is that a human military strategy? No, that's just good customer service. Rule number 1 of any service industry: the customer is always right, even when they're spectacularly wrong, especially when they're spectacularly wrong." Tank finished his crossword, folded the puzzle neatly and stood up. "Well, I should get going. That cargo won't hold itself, and I've got 3 more systems to hit before the week's out. Any other diplomatic crises you're planning to resolve?" "Probably not. This was just a favor for you. Most of the time, I really am just a guy who moves things from one place to another." Tank paused at the door. "Though I will say this, the galaxy might want to pay a little more attention to those intelligence reports. The footnotes especially. We put some interesting stuff in the footnotes." After he left, Thornweave sat quietly in his cabin, contemplating the nature of power in galactic politics. The hegemony had brought their finest warriors, their most advanced weapons, and their most intimidating psychological warfare specialists to what should have been a routine negotiation. They had prepared for every conceivable threat, except the most obvious one: a single human who was very good at his job. The irony was not lost on him. In a galaxy where strength was measured in firepower and fear was considered a legitimate negotiating tactic, the most effective diplomatic tool had turned out to be a maintenance worker with a good understanding of human psychology and access to the building's schematics. Somewhere in the depths of Neutral Station Omega-7, Tank Rodriguez was probably helping someone fix a malfunctioning atmospheric processor, offering technical advice with the same casual competence he had shown in dismantling the confidence of an elite military force. Tomorrow he would be in another system, moving cargo and maintaining equipment, being invisible and helpful, and absolutely unremarkable, until someone needed a diplomatic crisis resolved in under 3 minutes. The galaxy, Thornweave reflected, was about to become a much more interesting place, especially for anyone who had been foolish enough to ignore the help